What is the end game of the US-Iran war? Well, this is the question that is echoing across world capitals tonight. It is a simple question, but deeply unsettling. The end game of this war is not very clear because the conflict between the United States and Iran is no longer just a confrontation between two adversaries. It has become a war shaking the entire Middle East, rattling the global energy markets and raising fears of a much wider geopolitical confrontation. Hello viewers, this is Aman Sharma and welcome to Homework.
Oh my God.
At the center of this crisis stands US President Donald Trump, whose message has been stark and uncompromising. Trump says he wants Iran's unconditional surrender. He has made it clear that Washington is not interested in negotiations and does not want Iran to get a nuclear weapon. According to Trump, the United States did not start this war, but it will finish it. These words signal that Washington is preparing for a prolonged confrontation rather than a quick diplomatic settlement. But even as the rhetoric escalates, faint signs of diplomacy have begun to appear. Iran's president has said that several unnamed countries have begun mediation efforts, suggesting that back-channel diplomacy may be underway. However, Tehran insists that any mediation must address what it calls the miscalculation of those who underestimated Iran's power and resolve. For now, though, diplomacy remains distant because the war itself is intensifying. Over the past week, the United States and Israel have unleashed a massive wave of coordinated attacks across Iran. This campaign began after dramatic and unprecedented killing of Ali Khamenei on February 28th in a joint US-Israeli airstrike. The assassination of Iran's supreme leader marked a turning point in the conflict. Tehran has described it as an act of war and a political assassination designed to destabilize the Islamic Republic. Iranian officials say their country was attacked without provocation based on what they call false claims that Iran posed an imminent threat. Iran's deputy foreign minister has accused Trump of seeking regime change in Iran. In a sharply worded response, he said Trump wants to select a new Iranian leader, even though, as he put it, the US president cannot even appoint the mayor of New York. But Trump himself has made it clear what his vision looks like. He has openly suggested that once Iran surrenders, Washington would help install what he calls a great and acceptable leader in Tehran. Those comments have only reinforced fears that this war could ultimately be about toppling Iran's political system. But regime change in Iran could be really complicated, given the near 47-year-long rule of Khamenei and his lieutenants. And on the battlefield, the scale of military operations has been staggering. The United States says its campaign, called Operation Epic Fury, has already struck more than 3,000 targets across Iran. According to the Pentagon, these attacks have damaged or destroyed 43 Iranian naval vessels, along with submarines, missile sites, command centers. The list of targets, in fact, includes the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps Joint Headquarters, the IRGC Aerospace Forces Headquarters, the Integrated Air Defense Systems, and Iran's ballistic missile infrastructure. To carry out these strikes, the US military has deployed some of its most powerful weapons: stealth bombers like the B-2 Spirit, the B-1 bombers, advanced fighter jets including F-15s, F-16s, F-18s, F-22 Raptors, and F-35 stealth fighters have all been used. American naval power has also played a major role, with nuclear-powered aircraft carriers operating in the region. Missile defenses such as the Patriot system have been intercepting incoming Iranian attacks, while drones, including the advanced Lucas drone systems, have conducted surveillance and strikes. Washington claimed these operations have had a dramatic impact. According to US official, Iran ballistic missile retaliation has dropped by nearly 90% since the start of Operation Epic Fury. But Iran insists it still has options. Tehran says it will strike wherever American attacks originate from. That warning has already been felt across the Gulf region. Several US partners in the Persian Gulf, including the United Arab Emirates, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, Kuwait and Oman, all have been hit by Iranian drones and missiles. According to an Associated Press report, some of these Gulf states are now privately frustrated with Washington. They claim the United States did not give them any advance warning before launching the February 28 strike that killed Khamenei. Without warning, Gulf governments had little time to prepare for Iran's retaliation. And as missiles and drones began raining down across the region, the conflict suddenly felt much closer to home. Meanwhile, the war is also threatening one of the world's most critical energy arteries, the Strait of Hormuz, through which nearly a fifth of the world's oil supply passes. It has become a focal point of global concern. Iran says it has not closed the strait and insists it will not prevent ships from passing through. But Tehran has warned that security is now the responsibility of the ships themselves. Iran has also pushed back against claims that its navy is escalating tensions. Officials say the Iranian warship Iris Dana was simply returning from a ceremonial naval exercise hosted by India and was unarmed and in non-combat configuration when it passed through the region. Still, the mere possibility of disruption in the Strait of Hormuz has already rattled energy markets. Oil prices have surged, and that surge could soon become a domestic political problem in the United States too. If fuel prices rise sharply, it could hurt American consumers just months before the US midterm elections. That political reality may explain why Washington recently issued a temporary 30-day waiver allowing Indian refiners to continue buying Russian crude that is already in transit. The move appears designed to stabilize global oil supplies and prevent further price spikes. But the biggest question remains whether this war could expand even further. New reports now suggest the conflict may already be drawing in other major powers. According to CNN, Vladimir Putin has expressed condolences to Iran following Khamenei's death, and more significantly, US intelligence sources claim Russia may be providing Iran with intelligence about American troop movements, ships and aircraft. If confirmed, that could mark a major escalation, effectively bringing Moscow closer in the battlefield. It is clear that Putin is not Trump's friend when it comes to this war. At the same time, Israel says the conflict is not about Iran itself. Israeli officials, in fact, argue that Iran's network of regional allies, especially the Hezbollah, poses a broader threat across the Middle East. That is why, according to Israeli officials, both Iran and its allied groups are now being targeted. So as the war deepens, the stakes continue to grow. A conflict that began with targeted strikes has now evolved into a confrontation that touches the Gulf, global oil markets, and potentially even the balance of power between the world's major powers. Which brings us back to the central question. Is this war about deterrence? Is it about regime change? Or is it the beginning of an even wider conflict that could reshape the Middle East for years to come? Right now, no one truly knows. But one thing is clear, that the end game of this war, whenever it comes, will shape not just Iran or the United States, but the entire global order. To discuss this further and get real feedback from the ground, I am now joined by three reporters who are there on the war field, capturing all the action. Paula Hancock from CNN International joins me from Dubai, while Sanjay Suri and Rifat Abdullah from CNN News 18 join me from Tel Aviv in Israel. CNN International correspondent Paula Hancock is in Dubai and she joins me here on CNN News 18. Paula, you're reporting from Dubai, which has already seen missile and drone interceptions during this particular conflict. What is the mood on the ground right now?
Well, we are starting to see more people on the streets. We're starting to see more cars on the roads, but it's still nothing like it usually is. There have still been interceptions that we have heard in the past 24 hours, although the number does seem to be lowering. Now, the official figures that we have seen was that over a 24-hour period, there were only a few missiles that were fired in, but still well over 100 drones. So that is appears to be the change that we're seeing: less missiles, more drones. But we're also hearing a lot more fighter jets in the air as well over the last couple of days. So things are starting to change slowly. We are also seeing more flights being able to take off and take passengers out of Dubai back to their home countries. But certainly there still is that capability by Tehran to be able to fire missiles and drones into the UAE and into other Gulf nations.
That brings me to my next question, actually, that given, Dubai's position as a major global aviation, a global trade hub, this disruption that we are seeing in flights, shipping, business as the conflict escalates, how much do you think this will have an impact on the UAE as a big market for all these sectors?
It will inevitably have an impact. I think it's too early to try and quantify that, and of course it's not over yet. But certainly when it comes to flights, for example, it is a global hub, as you say. We know that Dubai International Airport is the world's busiest international airport. You usually have up to 700 departures a day. Tens of thousands of passengers travel through that airport. We're seeing a fraction of that at this point. Flights did start taking off from here on Monday night, and they have gradually increased as the days go on. We just had a look at some of the flights that have come out of here. One landed in Dublin. We heard from the airport there that they said that's the first flight they've seen from Dubai in almost 5 days. Australia, Bulgaria, there have been other flights leaving as well, and it appears as though they are trying to increase that every day. So certainly they're trying to ease the backlog of people who should have been travelling the past 5 days but have had flights cancelled. It is still a lottery, though, as to whether or not you can get on a flight, and it's certainly causing some stress among holiday makers and passengers here who want to leave the UAE.
And Paula, several Gulf countries, we all know, host US military assets, US bases. We have seen some attacks also happening on them. Is there a real fear in the region that, the conflict could widen and maybe even directly pull the Gulf states into this war?
Well, I think you can argue that the Gulf states are already in this war because Tehran is targeting them. Many of them were very careful to distance themselves from what they believed the United States was planning to do, saying that the US couldn't use their air bases, couldn't use their airspace if they were going to carry out these attacks. And we know that some of the leaders behind the scenes were lobbying the US president quite hard to try and make sure that this didn't take place. It hasn't insulated them, though, from the retaliation from Iran. So I'd argue they're very much part of this war. They are on a defensive footing at this point. They have all said, though, that they reserve the right to retaliate, saying that it is a blatant attacks from Iran. It is unacceptable what Iran is firing into these Gulf nations at this point. And we know also that Iran is extending its scope of what it is targeting. It started saying US military targets. It's now saying American political centers. We've seen a number of embassies and consulates being targeted. But the fact is, here in Dubai, for example, we've seen that there have been blasts in the city centre, outside international hotels. We've seen across the Gulf energy infrastructure being targeted. So they are targeting far more than they say already.
And with the Strait of Hormuz, effectively disrupted right now, the oil markets are already reacting. How worried would you say are the Gulf governments about the economic fallout if this war drags on?
Well, this is exactly why these Gulf nations didn't want this to go ahead. They knew the economic fallout would be devastating. Again, it's too early to assess just how much of an impact there will be, but oil prices are soaring. We see stock markets falling, and we also see that there are no ships that are going through the Strait of Hormuz at this point. We can see from the radar that many of them are queuing up either in the Gulf of Oman or in the Persian Gulf, waiting to get some kind of guidance as to whether or not they would be able to go through. Iran itself as well has said that US vessels, Israeli vessels and vessels from Europe should not travel through the Strait of Hormuz. They have said that is forbidden, but at this point there are no ships from anywhere that are willing to go through that body of water. We have seen a couple of ships being targeted already by Tehran, so the longer it goes on, the more the damage will be. There's a fifth of the world's oil that goes through that particular body of water.
Well, that was CNN international correspondent Paula Hancock joining us live from Dubai. Paula, thank you so much for joining us. Now I will go over to two of my colleagues, Sanjay Suri and Rifat Abdullah, and both of them are in Tel Aviv, Israel. Sanjay, in fact, has been there ever since the Prime Minister's visit to Israel. Sanjay, what is the situation on the ground in Tel Aviv right now? And are sirens and missile interceptions continuing? And how are civilians coping with this constant threat?
You know, it may be too soon to say this, but there appears to be a reduction in the frequency of the sirens relative to the first couple of days of this war. The number of siren alarms certainly is coming down, and the gaps when people have some sort of a seemingly normal life between the sounding of one siren and the next are increasing. This may be, of course, not necessarily an indication that this is the way it's going to unfold henceforth. We simply do not know whether this is because the missile capacity of Iran has been degraded significantly, or whether Iran is conserving and managing its munitions and sort of rationing them out for itself for use at a later date. We have to see, of course, that Israel is a good distance from Iran, about 1,500 kilometers from the nearest points, and so it will be ballistic missiles that really Iran will want to target Israel with. There is a finite number of those. Needless to say, there's also a finite number of interceptors. At some point, this becomes a numbers game. Who runs out of missiles faster? At the moment, interception is continuing, but the incoming number of missiles is a little less than it was in the first couple of days of this war.
Rifat Abdullah is also here with us. And Rifat, how prepared do you think are Israel's air defense systems, particularly the Iron Dome, to handle the sustained attacks if this conflict escalates further?
To be honest, it seems better than 2025 June when I was here reporting from these streets. I am right now in Tel Aviv. There was 12-day limited war, but those days Iron Dome, our THAAD and other systems were not working properly. But this time Iran is continuously hitting Israel, targeting Haifa, Tel Aviv, Jerusalem. There is some damage, roughly 15 attacks took place, but there is massive damage at 4 locations. 12 people have been killed so far, what is the official figure here, and I think 30-40 people are injured. This is what officials say, though Iran is claiming huge damage and huge loss of US soldiers. It's the claim of Iran, but US forces and Israeli forces are hitting together the locations in Iran. They are carrying out aerial operations. Their warplanes are in Iran. They have hit so many locations so far. There is huge number of casualties in Iran. But I am right now in the lanes and bylanes of Tel Aviv. I can see there is a lot of disturbance here. Sirens are sounding and people are continuously going to the shelters, to the safe homes, to the safe shelter, bomb shelters. And the normal life is completely disturbed. Even the government offices are closed and important offices are closed, though a limited operation has been started at this airport. Some flights are operating, but by and large, the normal life is affected. You can see these are the lanes and bylanes in Tel Aviv, but you won't see more movement of people around. So we can say the Iran is trying its best to target Israel again and again, and the bases of US wherever they are able to do that. But they are not in a position to inflict more damage to Israel because Israel is already prepared for these things. I think Iran has given chance to Israel and US forces to make the US bases strong in last 8 months because there was limited war of 12 days in the month of June. US and Israel was not prepared. That was the only reason I think there was ceasefire because US and Israeli forces wanted ceasefire that time because Israeli ballistic missiles were hitting badly the streets and the areas of Tel Aviv, Haifa and Jerusalem. This time air defense system, not the Iron Dome because Iron Dome is effective for limited areas like the Hezbollah. Whenever they target, Iron Dome is being used because it is bordering Lebanon, and Hezbollah is also attacking continuously Israeli forces. But Israeli forces have literally demolished many areas in Nabati. I have reported from Nabati also in 2024. I have seen those areas. Those were earlier targeted, and Israeli forces are claiming that there is a lot of infrastructure of Hezbollah left and they want to destroy it. They are continuously targeting the areas in Lebanon, be it Dahi, Beirut, or South Lebanon, Tyre, Sidon. There are so many areas where Israeli forces are claiming that Hezbollah has a lot of infrastructure there. Hezbollah has weapon and ammunition depots are there. They are destroying, but Hezbollah is also targeting from the border areas of Israel because Israel is bordering with Lebanon, particularly through south side.
Yes.
And on the other side, we can say that Israeli forces are fighting on 3 fronts. Number one, with Hamas in Gaza, though there is huge loss of human lives. Children have been killed, women have been killed. More than 70,000 people have been killed in Gaza so far. There is huge human loss. But on the other side, now Israel is engaged with Hezbollah also in Lebanon. Continuously, the warplanes are operating in Lebanon. Then with Iran also. But with Iran, US and Israeli forces are fighting together. Iran is, I think, all alone. Whatever technology they have, they are trying to use that. But Israel, IDF has claimed that they have destroyed launchers, missile launchers. That's a big and huge damage if it is true. This is the claim of IDF. But by and large, situation is not good in entire Middle East. It took me a lot of time to reach here. It was very difficult to reach Tel Aviv because airspace was closed, and I traveled a lot by road. Finally, I reached Israel, and what I could see here, sirens are sounding again and again, and people take shelter in shelter homes and shelter safe bomb shelters to save themselves. That is the only reason there is no much casualty figure in Israel, because Israel is already prepared from last so many years for such kind of situations. Wherever there are population or wherever the big buildings are in Israel, be it Tel Aviv, Haifa or Jerusalem, bunkers are there, very strong bunkers. People quickly follow the home front command sirens and they follow the instructions. That's the only reason that the human loss is very limited or very low in Israel in comparison to Iran. Whenever Israeli forces or US forces are attacking Israel, there is huge human loss also being seen. Reason is that Iran doesn't have such kind of infrastructure which can just save the human lives like the bomb shelters everywhere. So I think Israel was already prepared for these things. They have seen it in the past, but situation is very tense across the Middle East.
And Sanjay, from what are you seeing, from what you are seeing locally rather, is there a sense that this conflict could widen now into broader regional war involving other actors in the Middle East as well? Because there have been attacks by Iran on the Middle East. But do you think other actors in the Middle East could now get involved, translating this into a bigger geographical war?
Well, that seems to have been the fear, certainly in the last few days. Again, it may be too soon to say this, but that fear seems to be diminishing somewhat. here in Israel, the view is that this is a further confirmation that Iran is some sort of a rogue state, that it is striking out at Arab nations as well. Of course, the intention or the declared intention of Iran is that it is targeting US bases and not other civilian infrastructure. That has not been the case entirely, as we have seen, and they are targeting those countries for hosting the entity they see as their enemy. But that said, there is some move now to calm that down. There have been a lot of moves from the Iranian government and the leadership to try and persuade leaders from these Arab nations that it is not these nations they are targeting, but the US facilities there. That division has not been as clear as declared. But here again in Israel, the focus is on Israel and what Israel can do together with the US to degrade and in fact erase the capacity of Iran to develop nuclear weapons or to fire ballistic missiles. These are the two targets for Israel together with the US, and to the extent that these targets are met and these opposition centers to Israel are wiped out by way of all these ballistic centers, that is what Israel is focused on. That there is a wider war, yes, Israelis are aware of that, but that's not their prime concern.
Well, thank you so much, Sanjay Suri and Rifat Abdullah. We are the only channel, in fact, to have two reporters reporting live from Israel and bringing us the ground reports that matter. Sanjay Suri, Rifat Abdullah, take care, be safe, and do run into that shelter when those sirens ring. Thank you so much for joining me on Homework.